By 1985, 1 in 3 Iowa farmers was in financial trouble. Land that sold for $4,000 an acre in 1979 was worth $1,300 by 1986. Banks weren't waiting. Auctioneers were booked out for months. Neighbors watched neighbors pack up everything they owned and drive away from land their grandfathers had broken with their hands. Most didn't come back, but some did. This is the story of 5 farms that should have died in the 1980s crisis and didn't. Earl Hargrove had farmed the same 320 acres outside Ames, Iowa, since his father handed him the keys in 1961. He'd borrowed big in the 70s like everyone told him to. Get big or get out, the government said. So Earl got big. By 1983, he owed the First National Bank $340,000. His corn was fetching $2.60 a bushel. He needed $3.10 just to break even. The loan officer called on a Tuesday morning in March. "Earl, we need to talk about the note." Earl set the phone down, walked out to his barn, and stood next to his 1967 Farmel 560 for a long time. He didn't sell the tractor. Instead, he called his wife Ruth into the kitchen that night, and they made a list, not of what they owed, of what they still had. 320 acres, a working well, a tractor that ran, and a farmer's market in Ames that was just starting to ask for anything grown without chemicals. Earl Hargrove planted 40 acres of vegetables in the spring of 1984. He kept 280 in corn to service the debt. By 1987, the vegetable operation alone was pulling $60,000 a year. The bank got paid. Earl didn't call it organic. He called it the way my daddy did it. The Brennan brothers, Thomas and Gerald, farmed wheat on the high plains of western Nebraska. When the Soviet grain embargo killed exports in 1980, wheat prices dropped like a stone thrown off a silo roof. Thomas wanted to walk. Gerald wouldn't let him. One evening, Gerald came in from town with a pamphlet he'd pulled off a bulletin board at the co-op. A university extension agent was hosting a meeting about alternative crops, sunflowers, grain sorghum, dry beans. Thomas laughed at him. "Gerald, we're wheat men. We're broke men," Gerald said. "There's a difference." They planted 200 acres of sunflowers in the spring of 1984. The neighbors thought they'd lost their minds. The processor in Scottsbluff paid $11 a hundredweight. By 1986, the Brennan brothers had paid off their operating loan and bought out a neighboring quarter section at auction, land another man had lost. They still grow sunflowers today. Margaret Henderson milked 60 cows on a farm outside Owatonna, Minnesota. When her husband Carl died of a heart attack in the winter of 1984, she was left with the farm, 4 children, and $190,000 in dairy debt. The co-op was paying $11.60 per hundredweight for milk. It wasn't enough. Her oldest son, Danny, 18 years old, drove into town and put a handmade sign in the window of the hardware store. "Fresh whole milk, direct from the farm. Call Henderson's." The hardware store owner let him leave it there. The call started that same week. By the end of 1985, Margaret was selling direct to 34 families in Owatonna and the surrounding townships. She charged $2.20 a gallon. The store charged $1.89. Every single family paid it without complaint, because they knew her name. They knew her cows. They knew the milk was cold and clean and came from land they'd driven past their whole lives. The co-op never knew what hit them. Stanley Kowalski did not go quietly. When the First Midwest Bank of Kankakee, Illinois, filed to foreclose on his 480-acre corn and soybean operation in January 1986, Stanley hired a lawyer. Not a fancy one. A young man named Dale Pruitt, who worked out of a 2-room office above a barber shop, and charged him $40 an hour. Dale found something in the loan paperwork. The bank had improperly calculated the variable interest rate on Stanley's operating loan, overcharging him by nearly $18,000 across 4 years. It wasn't enough to erase the debt. but it was enough to negotiate. Stanley kept 240 acres. The bank took the other half. He planted that 240 acres in soybeans that spring and didn't miss a payment for the next 11 years. He framed the loan documents and hung them in his barn. "So I remember," he told his daughter, "what happens when you sign something you don't fully read." The Delacroix family had farmed river-bottom land outside Boonville, Missouri, for 3 generations. By 1986, they were $280,000 in debt, with corn at historic lows and no end in sight. Raymond Delacroix was 54 years old. Too old, he figured, to start over. Too stubborn, his wife Evelyn said, to quit. His son Marcus had just come back from 2 years at the agricultural college, with a folder full of research he'd never shown his father. One night he set it on the kitchen table. It was about aquaculture, catfish farming. Raymond stared at it for a long time. "Marcus," he said, "I don't know a thing about fish." "You know water," Marcus said. "You know land. You know hard work. The rest is just reading." They dug 2 ponds in the spring of 1987, stocked them with channel catfish fingerlings, purchased on credit from a hatchery in Arkansas. By 1989, the Delacroix catfish operation was selling to 3 restaurants in Columbia and a fish market in Kansas City. The corn debt was refinanced. Then it was paid. Raymond Delacroix died in 2003, still farming the same land his grandfather had cleared. He never did stop calling himself a corn farmer, but the catfish saved him. By the mid-1980s, only 2.2 million farms remained in America, down from 6.8 million just 50 years before. The ones that made it didn't make it by doing nothing. They pivoted. They fought. They read the fine print. They called their neighbors. They planted something new in the ground that had always fed them. The 1980s farm crisis was not the concern of many Americans. One congressman said at the time, the farmer was alone on an island of difficulty. But these 5 farms found a way off that island. Not with help from Washington. Not with a bailout. With stubbornness and a different kind of seed. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. New stories every week here on Deep Furrow.